man stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with a poker face. His movements were precise, but his mind was a storm. The faint sound of the door opening drew his attention, but he didn't turn until he felt her presence closer. When he turned, Wine froze mid-step, her breath hitching. His perfectly styled hair, the crisp suit, and the effortless handsomeness made her heart skip a beat, as it always did. But she quickly composed herself, masking her racing emotions with a blank expression. Her raised a brow questioning her intrusion. "Why don't you want to have breakfast?" she asked in a low tone, avoiding his gaze. He shook his head, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. "This isn't what I want from you, Wine." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. After a moment of silence, she finally said, "This is my responsibility." Thames' chuckle grew harsher, his jaw tightening as he turned fully toward her. She lowered her head, gripping the edge of her sweater, her voice dropping even further. "Don't expect anything from me. Just think of this as me repaying you because I live in your house." His patience snapped, and he gritted his teeth, closing the distance between them in 2 swift steps. He grabbed her shoulders gently but firmly, his dark eyes searching hers. "You're my wife, Wine. This is your right. Why would you say something like that?" She bit her lip, refusing to meet his gaze. "I told you not to marry me. I told you I was being forced by my parents. Why didn't you refuse?" He exhaled sharply, his grip tightening slightly before loosening as he sighed. "Because I like you, Wine. Why can't you understand that?" His voice softened as he continued. "What is it? What's the reason you didn't want to marry me? What's bothering you? I knew you were keeping a secret from me." Her eyes finally met his, and for a fleeting moment he saw the raw pain and vulnerability in them. It felt like a dagger to his chest, but as quickly as it appeared, she masked it again, pushing his hands off her shoulders. Without a word, she turned around and walked out, leaving him standing there, the silence suffocating. He let out a frustrated groan, his fist colliding with the wall as anger and helplessness coursed through him. His other hand swept across the table, sending papers and a pen holder crashing to the floor. "Why won't you just talk to me?" he muttered to himself, his voice laced with anguish. He kicked the table. As soon as the door closed behind mine, she let her tears flow freely and muttered, "I'm sorry, 𝐀𝐮." At night, 𝐻𝐻 lay reclined on the bed, one arm draped across his forehead, his shirt unbuttoned at the top, revealing a glimpse of his toned chest. His eyes fluttered open when Wine opened the door and stepped in, holding a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. He straightened slightly, his cold gaze settling on her. "I didn't ask for it," he said in a low tone. Wine hesitated for a moment before responding. "You haven't eaten dinner." He leaned back, his expression unchanging. "I had dinner with a client." Wine shook her head, gently stepping closer. "I know you didn't." Her words caught him off guard, but he didn't respond. Instead, he watched as she handed him the mug. When her cold fingers brushed against his warm hand, he flinched slightly, his eyes flickering to hers. He set the mug on the nightstand, leaning forward. "What have you been doing?" he asked, his voice softer this time. "I was washing the dishes," she replied simply, avoiding his gaze. 𝐻𝐻 frowned, his jaw clenching. In one swift motion, he reached for her wrist and guided her to sit on the bed beside him. Taking her hands in his, he examined her reddened fingertips. "What do the maids do if you're working all day?" he demanded in a strict tone, his eyes darkening with frustration. He trying to pull her hands away, but his grip was firm. Without warning, he guided her hands beneath his unbuttoned shirt, pressing her palms flat against his warm torso. The sudden onslaught of warmth made her squirm, but his sharp gaze pinned her in place. "Sit quietly," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Her breath hissed as their faces drew closer, their noses nearly touching. His dark eyes bored into hers, searching for answers she refused to give. Then pressed his forehead against hers, his deep voice breaking the silence. I'm tired of this life, Wine. He whispered, his words heavy with emotion. I want to know what's in your heart. What are you keeping from me? Wine's lips parted, but no words came. Her heart raced, pounding so loudly she feared he could hear it. I want to work on this, on us. He continued, his voice softening. I want to give you the life, the love, and the affection you deserve. Let me do it, Wine, please. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, her voice trembling as she whispered, I don't deserve any of them. She pulled her hands away from his mouth, standing abruptly, then reached out as if to stop her, but something in her broken gaze froze him in place. He watched in silence as she turned and walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind her. Leaning against the headboard, he let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. His chest ached as he stared at the empty doorway, the coldness of the room seeping into his bones. For a long time he sat alone in the quiet night, the weight of her silence crushing him more than any words could ever. After 2 hours, when there was no sign of Wine, time laid and soon went into deep slumber. After a few moments, the door opened and Wine entered. She wiped her face and walked over to the bed, climbing and lying beside him. She stared at his handsome face and reached out her hand. Why are you so good to me, Tim? I don't deserve this. She whispered, touching his face. This is not right. I shouldn't have fallen for you. You shouldn't have made me fall for you. My past will ruin everything. I don't have the courage to lose you, but at the same time I feel like I'm losing you. I don't want to live like this either. She whispered as tears rolled down her eyes. She sniffed, wiping her face and propping on her elbows, leaning close to him. I love you, she murmured and kissed his forehead. You're the amazing man on this earth. She whispered and kissed his closed eyes. I thought I could not trust any man in my life, but you changed my point of view. She whispered again and kissed his cheeks. Then squirmed slightly. Wine swiftly moved back and laid. When she was assured that he didn't wake up, she gently rested her head against his chest and closed her eyes. I don't know how would I face you if you found out about this. Few days later, today one of Tim's friends invited him and Wine to a party. After pleading and insisting so much, Wine finally agreed. Now Tim entered the bedroom. When his eyes landed on Wine, he froze in his tracks. She stood near the mirror adjusting her dress nervously. The dress he had chosen for her hugged her form perfectly. She looked breathtaking. Wine's eyes met his, but soon her gaze dropped to the floor as she noticed him staring. She bit her lip, unsure of his reaction. Tim approached her slowly and gently lifted her chin, his thumb brushing against her skin as he smiled warmly. You look beautiful, he murmured, his voice soft and sincere. Her cheeks flushed and she hesitated before whispering, I'm scared. Tim's brows furrowed in concern. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing comforting circles on her cheek. What are you scared of? I'm here with you, he whispered. Today, for some reason, the walls Wine had built around herself crumbled. She didn't push him away. It's been 2 months to our marriage and this is the first time you're stepping out of the house. I always keep telling you to go for outing and shopping. She remained silent, staring at him. Her head tilted slightly into his hand, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel comforted by his presence. He noticed the subtle shift and smiled, dropping a kiss to her forehead. Shall we? She nodded, her heart racing wildly, and he took her hand, leading her out. As they arrived at the venue, Wine instinctively clung to his side, her grip on his arm frame. Tim couldn't hide his smile. It was rare for her to see physical contact, and it made his chest swell with a sense of pride and protectiveness. He introduced her to his partners and friends, his hand never leaving hers. Wine nodded politely as she looked around with wide doe eyes. Tim couldn't help but admire her. Suddenly a familiar voice broke through the crowd. Tim, Then turned, his expression brightening momentarily as Jason approached. But while froze beside him, her grip on his arm tightening like a vice. Jace, Thang greeted, shaking his hand. "This is my wife, Wine." Jace's smirk was sharp and unsettling. His gaze shifted to Wine, and for a brief moment both froze. Wine's trembling didn't escape Thang's notice. "Wine, nice to meet you." His smile deepened as he scanned her head to toe. "She's very beautiful, Thang." The way he spoke stirred rage within him. He frowned, glaring at Jace. Wine's breath hissed as cold sweat formed on her forehead. The memories came rushing back. Jace and his friends, the night that shattered her world. Thang's concern deepened seeing her condition. "Wine, are you okay?" She nodded weakly, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jace chuckled darkly. "Well, you don't seem well. I'll excuse myself." Thang guided her to a seat, crouching beside her. "What's wrong?" he asked gently, his hand resting on hers. Wine remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. After a long pause, she mumbled, "Stay with me." Thang nodded, his heart aching at her vulnerability. "I'm here with you." He stayed by her side, his presence steady and grounding, until her trembling subsided. When she finally calmed, she looked up at him with watery eyes. "I want to leave," she murmured. He frowned but nodded. "Go to the washroom, freshen up. I'll say my goodbyes and we'll leave, okay?" Wine parted her lips to speak but then stopped, thinking, "I can't show Jace my weakness. He can't do anything here. I should be brave." She thought and agreed. Then watched her disappear into the crowd. In the washroom, Wine splashed cold water on her face. Taking deep breaths, she finally felt a silver of peace until she stepped out and found Jace blocking her path. Well, he sneered. His smirk winked. "Still as beautiful as ever." Her blood ran cold. "Move," she said, her voice trembling. Jace stepped closer, making her backpedal. "Why don't we talk about that night? How will Thang react when he finds out his wife spent the night with me and my friends?" Wine clenched her fists, tears forming in her eyes. "You raped me," she hissed, her voice breaking. Jace laughed cruelly, pulling out his phone and showing her a video. "Who would care about that, Wine? Look at this. You think you deserve Thang? You're unworthy of him. You have no dignity left. You have been keeping him in the dark and deceiving him." Her vision blurred with tears as his words pierced her heart. Panic consumed her and she blindly ran. Her sobs muffled against her trembling hands. Thang caught her in the hallway, his arms steadying her as she collapsed against him. "Wine, what happened?" he asked urgently, his hands cradling her face. She barely managed to whisper, "I want to go home, please." His jaw tightened, but he didn't press further. Wrapping an arm around her protectively, he guided her out of the venue, his heart breaking at the sight of her tear-streaked face. The car ride back was heavy with silence, save for Wine's quiet broken sobs and raindrops. Thang's gaze kept flicking between the road and her trembling frame. He had asked her what was wrong multiple times, but each time she refused to answer. By the time they arrived home, the rain turned from soft drizzle to downpour. Wine wordlessly walked toward their bedroom, then followed her, his voice soft yet free. "Wine," she paused but didn't turn. "Do you already know Jace?" He asked, his voice tinged with worry. "The way he talked to you, the way you reacted, it wasn't like you were meeting for the first time." Her body stiffened, but she didn't respond. Thang took a cautious step closer, his tone growing gentler. "Wine, you can trust me, speak your heart out. Maybe it could change things for better for us, But before he could finish, something inside her broke. Her chest heaved as she spun around, tears streaming down her face. "It won't change anything for good," she screamed. "Stop being so good to meet him. I don't deserve it." Thang frowned, his hands moving to her shoulders, holding her steady. "Wine, why are you saying this? Why are you reacting so harshly?" She shoved his hands away, her voice cracking as she yelled. "Because after knowing my truth, you'll hate me. You'll feel disgusted by me. You have been deceived by me and my parents. We kept you in the dark. Ken stared at her in shock as she yelled like a maniac. I'm not worthy of your thing. I'm a trash. I'm just a tissue paper used and thrown away by someone else. Tam froze, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. His eyes widened in shock, unable to process the bitterness in her voice or the pain in her words. I let out a bitter chuckle, her tears flowing freely. There it is, she said, her voice laced with mockery and pain. The truth. Your perfect little wife was used by Jess and his 3 friends. Are you happy now, Sam? Now you know who you're married to. A girl with no dignity. Tim clenched his fist, fury and anguish boiling inside him. The puzzle pieces clicked into the places, her trembling, her fear, her resistance. It all made sense now. Don't, he said through gritted teeth, stepping closer. Don't ever use those words for yourself again, Wine. Why shouldn't I? She screamed. That's what I am. Wine. Tam yelled, his voice sharp and commanding, making her flinch, but she didn't stop. Her sobs grew louder, her words desperate. She couldn't see him feeling disgusted with her. She couldn't see the disdain in his eyes for herself. Before that happened, she must end it here. I need a divorce. Tam's jaw tightened, his temper barely contained. Stop it, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. I need a divorce. She screamed again, showing him hard. Shut up. Tam bellowed, his voice thundering over hers. Get out of here. Van froze for a moment, staring at him with wide, tearful eyes. Then, without another word, she turned around and left. Tam paced the living room, his hands pulling at his hair as the rain continued to pour outside. His heart shattered into pieces, knowing what she had endured, and rage burned inside him at Jess. He wanted to destroy the man who had done this to her, but amidst his anger, a groaning very cramped, he walked into his bedroom but found it empty. His steps faltered as realization hit him. He had meant the living room, not the house. Did she leave the house? It had been 15 to 20 minutes where she would have gone. He bolted toward the door, the sound of thunder echoing in the distance. Wine, he called out into the storm, his voice desperate. The rain soaked him to the bone as he searched the street, panic clawing at his chest. After a few agonizing minutes, he spotted her. She was sitting on the footpath, hugging her knees, her body trembling as she cried. Relief flooded him and he ran to her. Wine, he breathed, kneeling in front of her. She looked up, her face pale and drenched with rain and tears. I knew you would hate me after knowing about my past. That's what I was scared of. She murmured between hiccups, staring at him in a daze. Tim pulled her to her feet. For a moment they stared at each other, the rain cascading around them. Then, unable to hold back, Tim wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his chest. Why did you leave the house? He whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean it like that. He exhaled shakily, pressing his lips to her damp hair. Don't scare me like this again. Wine collapsed into his warmth, her sobs muffled against his chest. His steady heartbeat soothed her, his embrace grounding her in a way nothing else could. Tam cradled her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You're not trash, Wine. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you that. You're mine and I'll protect you, always. She nodded weakly, her tears finally subsiding as she let herself be vulnerable in his arms. Without another word, he scooped her up and carried her home. Both of them soaked to the bone. His jaw was tight with worry, but his movements were gentle as he set her down on the bed in the bedroom. Her shoulders slumped, her hair plastered to her face, and she looked utterly defeated. Go change, Ken said softly, his tone firm but caring. You'll catch a cold. She hesitated, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but she nodded and cruised toward the bathroom. Tam watched her go before heading to the guest bathroom to change into dry clothes. When he returned to the bedroom, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in a loose sweater and sweatpants, staring blankly at the floor. Her damp hair clung to her neck and shoulders, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Tam grabbed a towel and kneeled in front of her. Come here. he said gently, his voice a soothing balm to her frayed nose. Wayne obeyed silently, letting him towel dry her hair. The room was quiet except for the soft rustling of fabric and the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. Once he was done, he set the towel aside and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Get in bed," he murmured. She complied without protest, slipping under the covers. Tim tucked her in, pulling the blanket up to her chin. He moved to turn off the bedside lamp when her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Her eyes were glassy with unshed tears as she whispered, "Tim." He crouched beside the bed and hummed, ruffling her hair. "Jess has my video." Tim's expression darkened, anger flashing in his eyes, but his voice remained calm. He placed a firmly gentle palm on her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear that escaped. "You don't have to worry about it. I'll handle everything fine. Trust me." She held his hand in a firm grip. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she choked out, Don't you feel disgusted with me?" His hand moved to her jaw, holding it firmly but tenderly as he leaned closer. "Why do you keep thinking like this?" he asked, his voice filled with quiet frustration. "My love for you isn't that weak, Wayne. Nothing, not your past, not anyone can change how I feel about you." Her lips trembled as she stared at him, her eyes softening with affection. "I'm sorry for everything," she whispered, her voice cracking. A small smile tugged at his lips and he shook his head. "You don't need to apologize, but if you really want to." He leaned closer, his tone turning playful. "I'll make you do it my way later. For now, just rest." Wayne hesitated before whispering, "Stay with me." Tim didn't need to be told twice. He climbed into the bed beside her, his movements careful. She turned to him immediately, laying her head on his chest and taking him by surprise. "Thank you, Tim. Thank you for loving me so much," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Tim's arm tightened around her, his fingers gently tracing patterns on her back. "You deserve it, Wayne. Not just this, but more. So much more." Silence enveloped them, the only sound the soft rain outside. "I'm scared," Wayne admitted, her voice trembling. Tim pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm with you. You don't have to be scared anymore." He whispered, his words wrapped around her like a protective cocoon. She clung to him, her breathing evening out as his warmth and reassurance lulled her into a peaceful slumber. Tim stayed awake for a while, watching her sleep. His fingers brushed through her hair as he vowed silently to protect her from anything and everything, whatever it took. He would make her feel safe and loved. At midnight, Wayne suddenly sat up, her scream shattering the stillness of the night. Tim bolted upright, his heart pounding as he reached for her. "Wayne, what happened?" he asked, his voice laced with panic. Wayne's chest heaved as she gasped for air, her body trembling and drenched in sweat. She stared ahead, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered in a shaky voice. "Jace is here, his friends." She pointed at the wall as if someone was really there. Tim's heart clenched at the fear in her voice. He scooted closer, wrapping his arms around her trembling frame. "Wayne, no one is here. It's just a nightmare." She shook her head, holding his arm. "No." Tim cupped her face to make her meet his gaze. "You're safe with me," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. Wayne's tears didn't stop as her body stiffened. "They're not here, right?" she asked, sobbing uncontrollably, and burying her face in his chest. Tim stroked her back. "No, it's just a nightmare. I won't let anyone hurt you." Gradually, her sobs began to subside, though her body still shook with residual fear. She remained nestled in his arms, drawing solace from his warmth and presence. After a few moments of silence, she finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. "I used to be the tutor of Jess' younger brother Ace," she began, her fingers gripping Tim's shirt tightly. Tim's brows furrowed. "You don't have to tell it, Wayne." "I want to," she murmured, snuggling further into him. Tim remained silent, stroking her hair and pressing his lips to the top of her head time to time. "One day I went to their house for a session," her voice cracked. Ace and his parents weren't home. It was just Jace and his friends. Then stiffened his grip on her, tightening protectively as she continued. "They trapped me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I managed to send my dad a message, but by the time he got there, they had already..." Her voice broke and she buried her face in his chest, unable to say the word. Then clenched his jaw, his face curling as rage simmered beneath the surface. "Didn't you go to the police?" he asked after some moments in a low tone. "We did, but they had strong backgrounds, powerful families. My dad couldn't even afford a good lawyer," she murmured, her voice muffled against him. A bitter silence hung between them, broken only by her quiet sniffles. Theo's heart ached, not just for what she had endured, but for the injustice she and her family had faced. He pulled back slightly, tilting her chin up to look at him. His gaze was intense. "I promise you, I'll bring you justice. They won't get away with this." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time there was a glimmer of hope. "Th, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. He leaned his forehead against hers, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "You're not alone in this anymore, Wine. I'll always be there. Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then gently laid her back down, pulling the blanket over them as he wrapped his arms around her protectively. She nestled closer, her head resting against his chest. Time skipped. Wine sat on the bed, her legs stuck beneath her. She glanced at the clock for the 100th time, her heart heavy with worry. Just as her thoughts began to spiral, the sound of the front door opening reached her ears. Moments later, Theo stepped into the bedroom, his tie loosened and his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. He passed her a weary smile, running a hand through his messy hair. "Did you eat?" he asked gently, his voice laced with fatigue. At the same time, Wine blurted out, "What took you so long?" Theo chuckled softly, sitting beside her on the bed. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her palm. "I've been busy, but for good reason," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "They have tracked down Jace and all his friends. They're cornered now, they can't escape. We just have to wait for the court to issue its orders." Wine's breath hitched, her eyes brimming with tears as a relieved smile spread across her face. "You really did that," she whispered. Theo nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And Ace," he added, his tone hardening slightly. "I taught him a lesson too. If he hadn't forgotten to tell you not to come that day, none of this would have happened." Wine's eyes widened. "What did you do?" "Theo is still young." Theo chuckled and reached out to pinch her nose gently. "He's not a kid anymore, Wine. You saw him 2 years ago. Now he's a grown man. And don't worry, I didn't do anything drastic. Just gave him a few well-deserved punches to remind him of his mistakes." Wine nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips, but then her expression grew serious as she looked at him with concern. "What about the video?" she asked hesitantly. Theo's gaze softened and he cupped her cheek with one hand. "It's gone," he reassured her. "I broke Jace's phone and checked all his devices. The video was only on his phone. You don't have to worry about it anymore." Relief washed over her and she asked, "Is Jace in police custody?" He shook his head in denial. "Arrest warrant have been issued against him. He is in the hospital for now. I broke his hands and teeth." Wine nodded. Their hands still intertwined, but the nagging doubt in Wine's heart wouldn't let her rest. She looked at him hesitantly. "Theo, are you pitying me?" Theo sighed deeply, pulling her closer until her head rested against his chest. "Wine, do you feel any change in how I have treated you? In my love for you?" She shook her head silently, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. "Exactly," he murmured. "I didn't love you out of pity, and I didn't stop loving you after knowing the truth. If anything, it brought me closer to you. Nothing has changed for me." Wine's throat tightened and she tilted her head to look up at him. His gaze was full of warmth. Theo hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "From the first day my father showed me your picture, I knew I wanted to be with you. I wanted to build a home with you, Wine. You're everything I have ever wanted." Tears spilled over her lashes and she reached up to cup his face, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Tim. I thought, you'll humiliate me and leave me after knowing what happened. That's why I pushed you away, but I won't lie." She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. "In the process of pushing you away, I fell for you." Tim's lips curved into a soft smile and he leaned forward to press a lingering kiss to her forehead. "It's okay. I'm glad you feel the same way for me," he whispered against her skin and closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his affection seeping into her. The moments passed in silence until Tim spoke. "The weather has changed." His deep voice, smooth and teasing, Wine looked at him, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What?" she asked, clearly not understanding. His lips tugged into a mischief smile. "You have been different these days. Even the way you dress, all my favorite colors." Her eyes widened, she glanced down at her outfit. She parted her lips to speak, but Tim's playful smirk said he wasn't buying any denials. Wine's face flushed a deep crimson and she quickly got up, stammering, "I should go check if the maids have done their work." She made to leave, but before she could take a step, Tim grabbed her wrist, his grip firm yet gentle. With a swift tug, she lost her balance, and the next thing she knew, she was sprawled on top of him. Her heart raced as their faces were only inches apart. His dark eyes glinted with amusement as he whispered. Anne screamed, trying to get up, but Tim's arm wrapped around her waist, holding her in place. "Tim, let me go," she mumbled, avoiding his kiss, but he only smirked, his free hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You're so cute when you're shy," he teased. "Admit it, you have been dressing like this just for me." Her cheeks burned and she buried her face in his chest, her voice barely audible. "Stop teasing me." Tim chuckled softly, his chest vibrated beneath her. "Why should I? It's so much fun seeing this side of you." When he finally stopped teasing, Ryan lifted her head slightly, her gaze hesitant. Her hands trembled as they rested on his chest, and she took a deep breath before whispering, "Tim, I love you." The words came out so softly that for a moment she thought he hadn't heard her. But then his playful expression softened, replaced with something deeper, more intense. Before she could lose her nerve, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender, shy, and full of unspoken emotions. Tim's hand slid up to the back of her head, holding her gently as he deepened the kiss, pouring all his affection into it. When they finally broke apart, Wine's face was flushed and her breathing uneven. Tim didn't say a word. Instead, he buried his face in her hair, inhaling her sweet scent. Wine remained on top of him, her heart thundering in her chest as she felt his warmth envelop her. "You're not going to tease me now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tim chuckled softly, his lips brushing against her ear as he murmured, "Not this time." They lied like that, tangled in each other's arms, the world outside fading.